In the Pokemon TCG, you usually win by taking all 6 of the prize cards that you set out at the start of the game. Sometimes you might win by knocking out your opponent's only Pokemon in play, or aka by donking them. But very rarely will the average player win by their opponent not being able to draw a card at the start of their turn, also known as decking out. Decking out is the main built-in check to Ultra Turbo strategies that dig to the bottom of their deck as fast as possible. With no deck out, Turbo decks would be much stronger and less skill would be needed to play the game. But what if your only way to win games of the Pokemon TCG was by forcing your opponent to run out of cards in their deck? Enter mill strategies. Mill refers to strategies where your main goal is to discard cards from your opponent's deck until they deck out. It's the ultimate fusion between offense and defense in the Pokemon trading card game. Sure, by definition you aren't offensive because you're not taking any prize cards, but you are also very aggressively attacking the opponent's resources to accelerate a win condition. Well, there are some decks today that try to do this, notably Great Tusk Mill and Wugtrio Mill, but these decks aren't that good competitively and struggle to place well at major tournaments because of the environment we exist in right now. But there was one era in Pokemon TCG history where mill decks were not only really good, arguably the best in the game, but so broken in standard that they got a card banned. Yes, Mill was once so good that it caused one of the only standard format bans in Pokemon TCG history. So today I'm here to break down why Mill was so good in 2020, how it worked the way it did, and why Pokemon was forced to ban the strategy. Let's go. This story actually starts all the way back in 2018 when Sun and Moon Ultra Prism released and created the monster that would become one of the faces of Mill in 2020, Oranguru. Oranguru has the resource management attack. It puts 3 cards from your discard pile on the bottom of your deck in any order, for 1 colorless energy. This doesn't appear to be some broken attack at first glance, since the opponent can just knock out Oranguru by attacking, meaning you can't use resource management forever, right? Well, we'll get back to this point a little bit later. But Oranguru is without a doubt the best resource recovery Pokemon ever made, and there's really no debate here. Resource management can recover any card 3 at a time and prevents deck out by putting them directly into your deck, all just for 1 colorless energy on a basic Pokemon with above average HP. Oranguru went on to be the face of control in Sun and Moon, pioneering a wave of handlock and energy denial decks that were very successful in standard and so broken and expanded that it got banned there. But now let's jump to the release of Sun and Moon Unbroken Bonds in 2019, where one of the most fundamentally broken cards ever made released, Lieutenant Surge's Strategy. Surge's Strategy is a supporter card that simply allows you to play 2 supporter cards this turn, but only if you're behind on prizes. Basically, by playing Surge when behind on prize cards, you can then play 2 other supporter cards on that same turn. This literally breaks the rules of the game by allowing you to play 2 of a card that you can only play once per turn. Surge would also get banned and expanded for its use in toxic handlock decks, and if this card ever returned, it's likely it could even get banned in standard if the right cards were legal with it. Simply put, this card is completely broken at its core and could easily enable toxic strategies much like Oranguru. But now we jump a few sets forward to Cosmic Eclipse, to where the tag team supporter cards were released. These were supporter cards with 1 guaranteed effect and another conditional effect. For example, Cynthia and Caitlyn, one of the best tag team supporters, puts a supporter from your discard pile into your hand when played. But if you also chose to discard a card from your hand, then you get to draw 3 as a bonus. This card was great for control and non-control strategies since it could recover supporter cards and draw cards at the same time. Tag Call is an item card from Cosmic Eclipse that searches your deck for 2 tag team cards and puts them into your hand. This could be tag team Pokemon GX or tag team supporter cards. Basically perfect for decks relying on Cynthia and Caitlyn or Guzma and Hala. Lily's Pokédoll also released in this set, which was an item card that could be benched like a fossil Pokemon. But if the 30 HP doll is ever knocked out by your opponent, they can't take any prize cards for it. This spawned many stall strategies in standard in the formats where Boss wasn't yet printed. But even once Boss was printed in Rebel Clash, Pokédoll was incredibly powerful at slowing the game down. But the really crazy addition from Cosmic Eclipse for our story today is Bellelba and Bryson Man. Bellelba and Bryson Man is a tag team supporter card that synergizes with Tag Call, and it also has one of the most insane effects we've ever seen on a supporter card. Bellelba and Bryson Man discards the top 3 cards from both players' decks once it's played. Then, if you choose to discard 3 cards from your hand, you can force both players to discard bench Pokemon until 3 remain. But honestly, this was an afterthought in most situations. The real use of this card was as a mill 3. Sure, you did mill 3 cards from your own deck, but what if your deck had 0 cards in it anyway? I'm getting ahead of myself though, as now we jump just a few months forward to Sword and Shield base set. This was where mill was really taken from a funny gimmick and maybe a decent meme deck to a full-blown tier 1 archetype. First to note from this set is Zacian V. This card is one of the best attackers ever with 220 HP and a 3 energy attack doing 230 damage, and considering that this is 2020 and not 2026, these numbers were insanely mind-blowing at the time. But for our story today, the most important attribute of Zacian is its ability Intrepid Sword. This ability draws 3 cards at the cost of ending your turn, and if you drew into any metal energies, you could attach them to Zacian. But for a control deck that usually passes the turn anyways with, say, a Lily's Pokédoll in the active, you're pretty much alright drawing 3 to end most turns, as this allows you to progress towards win conditions that require you to get to the bottom of your deck. Speaking of getting closer to the bottom of your deck, we have arrived at the namesake Pokemon of the main 2020 Mill archetype, Chinchino. Chinchino has the Make Do ability, discarding a card from your hand to draw 2 cards once per turn. Does this sound familiar at all? This card is definitely good enough to be the entire engine to most decks because it's just so consistent. It's a single prizer that draws you crazy amounts of cards that can be protected by Lily's Pokédoll and Mew. But what could this do for Mill? Well, now I think it's time to put all of the pieces together and show you why Mill was so broken. This deck's main goal is to reach 0 cards in the deck as soon as possible while spamming Bellelba and Bryson Man the entire time. Bellelba mills 3 from both players, but since you're trying to reach 0 cards anyways, this isn't really that bad. Surge allows you to mill up to 6 per turn once your opponent has taken a prize card, and obviously your opponent could just win the game on prizes if you were going like this, but Lily's Pokédoll spam could prevent this. With Zacian and Chinchino drawing stupid amounts of cards every turn, and Bellelba and Surge milling the opponent out, you can pivot to using Oranguru once your deck gets super low to recover Pal Pads, to recover your supporters, and other disruption cards like Crushing Hammer, or discarded Lily's Pokédolls. Eventually, the opponent should reach the magic 11 cards in deck going into your turn, at which point they've lost. First use Surge, then Bellelba twice to mill 6 cards from both players' decks, and bringing your opponent down to 5. And then you bench Mewtwo and Mew GX, who can copy the attacks of discarded GX Pokemon, attach a Fire Energy, retreat, and use Burning Magma GX from the discarded Magcargo GX. Magcargo GX's GX attack, Burning Magma, discards 5 cards from the top of your opponent's deck, and since your opponent would have 5 left, it wins you the game instantly. Yeah, pretty crazy. This works so well in part because most decks relied on turbo cards like the Dene GX and Professor's Research to play the game. But another big reason was the combination of cards for the mill player were almost impossible to beat. It was consistent, it was fast, and it was definitely broken. There was even another version that popped up that relied on the Baby Magcargo from Celestial Storm, and its smooth over ability. This ability basically functions as if you're playing the game like Edurgerillo, letting you search your deck for a card and put it on top of your deck. Combined with the other Oranguru from Sword and Shield as well as Zacian V, finding combo pieces was even easier than with Chinchino sometimes. And with Mareep to sleep opponents, Slumbering Forest to make sleep last longer, and 4 Lily's Pokédoll, some even said this worked better than Chinchino Mill. And a nice bonus was that the Slugma that evolved into Magcargo and Magcargo GX could also retreat lock for 1 energy, giving you even more options to control the board. If your opponent was low on switching cards and had, say, a Dedenne GX in play, you could easily use Boss's Orders to bring it up, use Slugma to trap it, and then spam Bellelba while your opponent couldn't retreat. In summary, the combination of turbo draw power, Lieutenant Surge's strategy plus Bellelba Bryson Man, and stall cards like Oranguru and Pokédoll created a nearly unbreakable strategy. Not only was this deck strong, but the main reason a ban was likely was that it was so uninteractive. The deck almost never did any damage, barely even attacked, hardly interacted with the opponent's Pokemon in any way, and just focused on playing this single player game of spamming trainers and draw abilities while sitting behind Pokédolls. It wasn't very fun for people to play against, and it also didn't help that the versions with Mareep and Slumbering Forest added sleep flips into the mix, and no one likes to have to deal with those since it's pure RNG. So if you were the Pokemon company, what card would you ban out of this combo? You could ban Oranguru, but by the time a ban was on the table, Oranguru was about to rotate out anyways. And while it was key to the strategy, it was actually used less in the early game than just sitting behind Pokédolls and Zacian. You couldn't really ban Zacian since it just isn't a ban-worthy card in a general context. You could ban Lily's Pokédoll, but Boss's Orders existed, and because of this, the card wasn't all that hard to play around. Banning Mew 3 or any of the Magcargo pieces made 0 sense, and Chinchino was just never going to get banned. So that kind of just leaves the Lieutenant Surge's strategy and Bellelba and Bryson Man. Surge honestly could have been banned here, but I understand why the Pokemon Company decided to ban Bellelba and Bryson Man from Standard instead. Surge in a vacuum isn't an unhealthy card in non-control strategies specifically, and it did see some healthy use cases in Standard that didn't involve this mill deck. But Bellelba was literally only used in control and turbo mill decks since all it does is mill cards. It is extremely uninteractive and toxic, and without Bellelba, mill decks wouldn't function at all. Maybe you could argue that without Surge, mill also wouldn't dominate like it did, but honestly, with one Bellelba each turn and the Pokédoll Mareep spam, you could probably make it work without Surge, although it definitely wouldn't be good. This card, quite frankly, was the easiest one to ban, and with Bellelba and Bryson Man gone, mill would instantly become unviable, and thus the era of mill domination in online tournaments during the pandemic was over. That is the story of how mill was so good in the Pokemon TCG that it was banned to stop its dominance. Thanks for watching. Subscribing will be greatly appreciated, and let me know in the comments what you think of mill decks. Anyways, take care, have a good one, bye.